We are in the middle of a profound transition. And this isn't just about new gadgets or faster internet. It's about a fundamental transformation in the way we think. For centuries, our minds were shaped by the culture of print, by the slow, linear process of reading. Now, we're shifting into a world defined by fractured digital streams. In this analysis, we're going to examine the hard evidence of this shift and what it means for our minds and for our society as a whole.
Now, you might have heard this term, brain rot. But this isn't just some internet slang. It was actually named Oxford's Word of the Year for 2024. And that tells you something. It signals a widespread cultural awareness that something serious is happening. It describes the very real mental decay that results from being saturated with superficial, low-quality content, a phenomenon we now have to confront head-on.
At the heart of this whole issue is a conflict, really, between two completely different ways of thinking. On one side, you have deep reading. This is the slow, immersive process that actually builds the neural circuits in our brain for critical analysis, for insight, for wisdom. And on the other side, you have superficial consumption. This is a state driven by a need for instant gratification. It leads to what experts call cognitive impatience, and it leads us incredibly vulnerable to manipulation. These really are the two paths our minds can take.
Now, this decline in deep reading, it's not just a feeling or a theory. It is an empirical reality, something that has been measured over decades. And the data? Well, it paints a very clear and, frankly, a very sobering picture of our collective retreat from the written word.
Let's look at the numbers. According to the American Time Use Survey, the percentage of Americans who read for pleasure on any given day has fallen off a cliff. Back in 2004, it was 28%. Fast forward to 2023, and that number has dropped to a historic low of just 16%. This isn't a blip. It's a steady, undeniable trend that's affecting the entire population.
And the trend is even more alarming when we look at young people. In 1984, more than a third of 13-year-olds read for fun every single day. By 2023, that number had completely collapsed to a mere 14%. This represents a massive generational shift away from a foundational habit. And the long-term consequences of this? Well, we're only just beginning to grasp them. And you can see the impact of this playing out right now in our institutions of higher learning. A huge majority, about 80% of college educators, are reporting what they call a shallowing effect. Students are finding it harder and harder to engage with complex texts. They struggle to follow dense arguments or nuanced language, the very skills that deep reading is supposed to build.
So the big question is, why is this happening? Well, the answer lies in the very architecture of our digital world. These online environments are literally engineered to reward speed and volume, not depth and understanding. They're actively and successfully rewiring our neural pathways for distraction.
Think about how we behave online. It's become what you could call a skimming reflex. We engage in doom scrolling, that compulsive need to consume negative information. We fall into zombie scrolling, that sort of dissociated state of mindless consumption. And we use skimming patterns, where our eyes just dart across the page in an F or Z shape, cherry-picking keywords instead of actually reading. Each of these habits trains our brain to avoid deep engagement.
And all of this is powered by a very potent neurobiological process. Every time you see a new, bite-sized piece of content, your brain gets a small hit of dopamine, the reward chemical. And then, of course, your brain wants another hit, and then another. This creates an addictive feedback loop that constantly rewards superficiality. Over time, the neural pathways that are required for sustained, deep focus, they're just weakened, they atrophy.
You know, the digital medium itself presents some fundamental problems for deep reading. First, there's cognitive overload. We're bombarded by this flotilla of news feeds, which makes it almost impossible to integrate new information into what we already know. Then there's the lack of what researchers call spatial fairness. With a physical book, you have a sense of place. That's gone on a screen, and it actually impairs our memory. And finally, there's constant task switching. The digital interruptions fragment our attention and make it nearly impossible to achieve that deep, restorative flow state.
The consequences of this shift go far beyond our individual ability to focus. The loss of our ability to read deeply is chipping away at the very foundations of a healthy society, our capacity for empathy and our ability to think logically.
You see, deep reading, especially reading narrative fiction, is one of the most powerful tools we have for developing empathy. It allows us to simulate social worlds, to truly inhabit the minds of other people. So as we lose this skill, we also lose that crucial ability to understand perspectives that are different from our own. And the consequences of that, for a functioning democracy, are severe. We can really break down the societal damage into three connected pillars. On the cognitive level, it leads to impaired decision-making and that cognitive impatience we mentioned, that inability to just sit with a complex problem. On the interpersonal level, it leads to emotional desensitization. And on the civic level, it leaves the population dangerously vulnerable to misinformation and demagoguery, easily swayed by simple emotional soundbites instead of complex truths.
And what's truly alarming is that our educational institutions are, in many ways, contributing to the problem. There's a term for it, readicide. It describes how schools can systematically kill the love of reading. They do this by reducing great works of literature to just a series of excerpts and sound bites, all for the sake of standardized tests. Instead of fostering a deep connection to reading, this approach just teaches students how to skim for the right answer.
Now, while this diagnosis is severe, it's not a terminal one. There is a path forward, but it's going to require a deliberate, strategic effort on our part to reclaim the depth of human thought and to, quite literally, rebuild the reading brain.
And let's be perfectly clear, the goal here is not to abandon technology. It's about becoming biliterate. This means cultivating a mind that is agile enough to handle the rapid-fire demands of the screen, but also strong enough to engage in the kind of slow, contemplative, and deep thinking that print culture made possible.
So, how do we do it? The strategy has to be multifaceted. As individuals, we can use structured methods like SQ4R, that's survey, question, read, recite, and review, to rebuild our cognitive endurance. Parents can enforce device-free bedrooms and have a cache of unplugged activities to help reset their kids' attention spans. Educators have to prioritize foundational print-based literacy before jumping to digital skills. And as a society, we all need to consciously curate our information streams and resist manipulation. These are all actionable steps we can take starting now.
And all of this really leads us to the central question of our time. In an age that is built on an architecture of distraction, how do we protect that quiet, internal, contemplative dimension of the human brain? How do we preserve the space required for true critical thought and for the generation of real wisdom? The writer Marcel Proust once called reading a fertile miracle of communication effected in solitude. It's in that quiet, solitary space where an author's thoughts meet our own that genuine insight is born. Protecting that space isn't about nostalgia for a bygone era, it is an absolute prerequisite for a thoughtful, and empathetic, and a resilient future.